Hello party people and welcome to this video. I am so happy that you're here. I missed you a lot and today we are going to dive a little teeny tiny baby bit into neurology. I hope I pronounced that right. As I said, for all the things or for all the neurological terms that I will use in this video, I do not know how to pronounce them, or oftentimes I will probably pronounce them wrong because I have only learned them in German, and obviously the English word is really similar but oftentimes pronounced really differently. So I hope you can forgive me for that. Obviously it is not my fault, but today we'll be talking about psychopaths. For me personally, this is a really interesting topic. I've wanted to go into forensic psychology for my later on, I don't know, university academical career for so long, and I am kind of tending towards it, but I'm not sure because there are many amazing fields of psychology. But this is also a really interesting one, and I do have my cheat sheet right there on my iPad with my notes because literally that is impossible to memorize. But I hope you like this video and we're going to dive into it right away. First of all, there is no blueprint of a psychopathical brain. Like, psychopathy is a spectrum of many different antisocial traits and symptoms that a person could have. And when it comes to the brain, there's no blueprint of what a brain of a psychopath looks like. I mean, there are huge significance, but obviously every brain is different. Even your brain is remarkably unique. There will be no brain ever on the world that is like your brain. So obviously psychopathy is always a spectrum, but I will be able to tell you a few significant traits. But first of all, we have to dive into the definition of a psychopath. And first of all, psychopathy, according to Google, is categorized as a pattern of antisocial, impulsive, manipulative, and sometimes even aggressive behavior, and is categorized by certain traits. And it's first of all the lack of empathy, guilt, or remorse. A psychopath, if they do something wrong, they will realize that in the eyes of society it is considered as wrong, but they will not feel crazy guilty about it as a normal person would. They will just move on with their lives without feeling much about it. And also a lack of emotional responses. They can understand emotions rationally, but oftentimes they lack of a lot of emotions, and that is often why they can't feel them as well in a lot of cases. And second of all, or third of all, it is superficial charm. Psychopaths are master manipulators. They are oftentimes incredibly charming and also impulsive, irrational behavior that they have. And they are also disregarding in a lot of times social rules or other people's rights. They sometimes don't really have an understanding. Like, all psychopaths are also narcissistic, and this narcissism is also kind of linked with the lack of empathy, of not being able to often understand where people are coming from. And obviously, if you can't just look at a person and be like, they're a psychopath. There are a few ways on how to categorize or diagnose a psychopath. Obviously, it has to be measured somehow, and there are various of measurements, but there is one that is the most famous, I'd say, or it was at least the only one that I knew before researching, and it is the Hare Psychopathy Checklist Revised. And what this basically does, I will put a picture of it right there. And what it basically does, it consists of 20 items of certain personality traits or characterization symptoms that a psychopath could have. And obviously, as you can probably see right there, there are also a few like superficial charm or grandiose sense of self-worth or lack of remorse and guilt, impulsivity, poor behavioral control, or promiscuous sexual relationships that sometimes, I mean, they could be associated to a psychopath, but if you have one trait of that, you aren't automatically a psychopath. There are also a few things that I would consider as sometimes normal to have, or that I know a lot of people in my surroundings that have these traits. For example, when it comes to high self-worth, I know a lot of people that are like that. And also, for example, if it comes to promiscuous sexual relationships, this could also be due to a certain type of attachment style. Like, for example, if you're an anxious avoidant attachment, you will do promiscuous sexual relationships more likely to avoid commitment. So all that I want to say is that if you have a few traits of that apply to you, it doesn't necessarily make you a psychopath. It is just a large amount of combination of these traits. And what basically happens is that you have to categorize between 1 to 2 on how much, 0 to 2, I'm sorry, on how much that trait applies to you. Like, for example, you hear early behavioral problems as a trait, for example, and 0 is, for example, that it doesn't apply at all to you. 1 says partially applies, and 2 says fully applies. And the highest score that you can get is 40. It consists of 20 items overall, and 40 would mean that everything highly applies. And obviously there is a certain, I don't know how to say it, a certain line on when you could be considered as a psychopath. And in the US or North America in general, they set this line at 30. They say if you have a score of 30 or above, you can be considered as a psychopath. And in the UK and Europe, like all of Europe, you usually take 25 as a line, that you say, okay, if the score is higher than 25, you can be categorized as a psychopath. But obviously, if a certain score is below that, it doesn't mean the absence of psychopathy, and it doesn't mean that you don't have psychopathy traits. And there are some scores of serial killers, of famous serial killers that I picked out. This is also why I chose to present this exact way of measurement, because it is very famous and there are loads of serial killers that had to do that test. And literally, when I was researching this yesterday in the middle of the night, and I kid you not, I wasn't able to sleep for the entire night. It literally freaked me out to read through what they done and to read their score and also see pictures of them. I feel like seeing pictures of them is the most horrific thing ever. I don't even know. I originally wanted to put pictures of them as well in the video with their scores, but I don't know if I can. I feel like I will decide when I cut this video in the moment. But it feels so weird seeing pictures of them, because they, like, you know what horrible dehumanizing things they did, but then you see a picture and they often look like somehow normal people. And I know, for example, if a Ted Bundy would have passed me on the street, I wouldn't have noticed. I wouldn't have looked after them. Like, a lot of these people are so averagely looking, and oftentimes you imagine like psychopaths or serial killer to be like literally like the symbolization of evil and of cruelty, and that you can see it within them. But oftentimes when you see pictures, you don't, and it is like literally freaking me out. And this is also why I wasn't able to sleep last night whatsoever. So please give me, no, I will not beg for likes. We will leave this as it is. But moving on to serial killers that have this like a certain score on the hair test. And first of all is Ted Bundy. He killed at least 30 women and girls and also raped them. This is, I will only say the numbers that they got convicted for, but for serial killers, there are a lot of cases that can't be directly linked to them, but they are assumed that they did it. And so obviously with people like that, the dark number of people that they murdered will be way higher than the number that they actually got convicted for. But I will say the number that they got convicted for with an at least. And Ted Bundy had a score of 39 out of 40, so highly psychopathic. And then we have Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer has killed, raped, and ate body parts of at least 16 young men and teenage boys and kept their bones and everything. And he had a score of 23 out of 40. Then we have John Wayne Gacy. He has a score of 27. He killed and raped 33 young men and boys at least, while hiding in their closets in a clown costume before he killed them. This is literally so crazy. I don't even know what to say. I feel like you can hear it in my voice that I'm taken back. This is so hard for me. It is genuinely unbelievable to me. It is crazy. It is sickening. And then lastly, I included a woman as well. Later on you will hear why. And that is Eileen Wuornos. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And she got a score of 32 out of 40, and she worked as a sex worker and killed 7 of her male clients. And as you can hear from the scores, or as you can maybe assume and guess, there are a few there is a little bit of criticism about these scales. And first of all, it is that the measuring can be super subjective. Like, for example, when it comes to traits such as irresponsibility or superficial charm, some person will say, oh my god, this person is incredibly charming, and other people will say no, they're not charming at all. And it can become especially dangerous if a psychopath is completing the test on their own, because they are remarkably good at lying, and they can literally just say that they are this or that, and people will literally believe them because they are master manipulators. So it is obviously, the scores are always really subjective, as I said. And also, it was developed or made with a bunch of male prisoners, which makes it really hard to replicate it onto other groups. Like, it makes it harder to replicate it onto women or, for example, children that show psychopathic traits. And also, as I said before, with the line America, 30 points, and in Europe, including the UK, 22 points. These are the regular measurements that are often or mostly used. For example, Jeffrey Dahmer, who is personally, from the things that he did, the most disturbing and horrific one, obviously is highly subjective, but he has gotten a score of 23. That wouldn't be considered as psychopathic. Psychopathic include, like, considering the American measurement and also the European. And obviously Jeffrey Dahmer is a psychopath. We don't need to talk about this. This is obvious. And these are also a few things that can be criticized about that score. But now we are going to dive into the common brain findings. Now we're actually going into the neurology part. I probably have to change the title. This was literally just like a little baby urology thing. But the most common finding are differences in the amygdala. The amygdala is basically for fear response. It recognizes threats and fear, and it can lead to the high road and low road response. The difference between low road and high road is that in low road, the fear response goes from the thalamus directly to the amygdala. So it's just like super fast and oftentimes not rational. Like for example, the most common example being used in lectures, for example, is you see a stick and you get immediately scared because you think it's a snake, because your brain didn't process it, and as I said, your thalamus sent the fear signal right away to the amygdala. Evolutionary, this is amazing. This makes a lot of sense because humans would have not survived if they would have logically evaluated if that would be a stick or a snake in that example. And high road is basically the opposite of it. This is a slow, evaluated fear response, and this has the difference that the thalamus sends it to the hippocampus first before it gets into the actual amygdala. And this is how it works for a normal person without psychopathic traits. But also psychopaths have huge differences when it comes to that. They have a significantly reduced fear response. I will put in some MRT scans if I can find them of a psychopathic amygdala and a normal amygdala. And they have reduced affective modulations, and especially when it comes to negative stimuli. And they often have a difficulty with differentiating safety and danger. Oftentimes when they see a threat or something that scares them, that is supposed to scare a person, they often don't get scared, and because they have difficulties with distinguishing a place of safety and a place of nature, this is also the reason why psychopaths often get incredibly bored, like literally, and that will lead them to risky behavior or antisocial behavior, and that is often caused because of boredom, which is oftentimes a significant symptom of psychopathy. And also what the amygdala also does for normal people is that they can learn from negative experiences. Like for example, if you see a snake one time and you get incredibly scared, you will be triggered by things that will look like it, you will be scared by snakes. A psychopath often also lacks of learning from negative fear responses. And further on, we have the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and this basically, what it does is it connects decisions with emotions, with guilt, and also with a certain type of outcome and consequences that a certain decision could have. And what it does for psychopaths is, as I said, they lack of certain type of emotions, of guilt and especially empathy, and that kind of leads to them not, like, the communication with the prefrontal cortex being weaker when it comes to guilt or certain regions that are connected to emotions. So when they will make decisions, it won't be as highly linked to emotions, guilt and consequences. Oftentimes a psychopath doesn't really care about it, and that difference can be found in scans of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Later, and moving on, we also have the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex. I hope I pronounced it wrong. I hope I pronounced it right, not I hope I pronounced it wrong. But the insula is basically for pain. It recognizes pain, physical as well as emotional. And it is basically a response to conflict and emotional important events, especially when it comes as well to other people. But the insula is also really good for physical pain. And it basically recognizes, like, for example, what a normal person without being a psychopath would feel if they would behave in a social setting in a certain way and a person gets afraid of them. They would be like, okay, I can see that that person is being scared of me. I feel that emotion. I feel really guilty and uncomfortable because of myself. I will stop the emotion, the behavior. That is how a normal person would do it. But as a psychopath, it would be more like of I can see that that person is afraid, and I can categorize the emotion, but the response that I get from this isn't as strong. Like, I don't feel guilty, I don't feel uncomfortable, and the reward is more important than I get from this than the other person's emotion, and that is why I continue with that behavior. That is how a psychopath would think compared to a normal person. So what it basically happens is that a psychopath is able to categorize another person's suffering, but they often don't feel empathy for it, which leads to them acting onto it anyways. A significant difference happens when it comes to the reward system. And what basically happens for everyone is that we get an expected reward. We know, okay, if we do this, we will feel good, and this and that happens. And that leads to happy hormones being released. So we get loads of dopamine and we feel really good and really happy about ourselves. And this activates the nucleus accumbens, and this leads to motivated behavior that will get us that emotional reward that we're craving. And psychopaths have that as well. They don't lack of it, such as other emotions. But they often, what is significantly different is that they often don't think about the consequences that a certain act to receive that reward could have. Like, for example, you can categorize it with two questions. Like, when you ask people if they would, one, have $100 directly that are linked to certain consequences, or you could ask the people if they want $50 directly without any consequences linked to it. What the majority of a normal person would say is that they would take the $50. They will be happy. It is still a lot of money. It is half of 100. You can buy a lot of things with it. Life goes on. But what a psychopath would do is they would be more likely to pick the $100 because they will not think about the consequences most of the time, and the reward for them will get too incredibly strong that they will act upon the imagined reward. This is the end of the video. I hope you liked it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it a lot, and I wish you a lovely rest of the day, whatever you're doing. Bye bye.